And thanks for SiegeCon for having me. I've been trying to come here for several years. So I guess a good question always is like, who am I, right? So for about 4.5 years, I worked at Rockstar Games making really cool trailers. I worked on all of these games. It was there that I actually developed film language because we needed to understand film to basically recreate film shots for trailers. And at a certain point, I was capturing some of those trailers all by myself. And I really liked the challenge of making fist fighting look really cool. So if you look at any of the LA Noire trailers where like Cole punches someone, I really had to study to try to get that feeling good in a trailer. And I also played a boxer in LA Noire. I get knocked out and just grunt a lot. So I'm most known these days for this game. I've been working on this game for a very long time, and I began working on it like fresh out of AAA when I was a lot more naive, and I kind of wanted to make the best beat 'em up of all time. But as we worked on it, we found that we were, as a two-person team, we were going to have to use a lot of ingenuity in order to make something that stood out. That you only have so much time, only have so much manpower, but while working on this game, basically started just examining game. I had been thinking about it for years and really started looking at game combat. This is just a trailer for the game.
Yeah. They call me when ninja people attack the street. My president's black and y'all gon' give it back to me. I spend half the week training and doing tournaments. I spar with gangbangers with Yankee Sherpa. It's too late now, you out of chances, bro. Your hands is low, gotta hail an ambulance to go. This ain't no slap boxing, we don't pretend to scuffle. I make the whole world look and still will bend a couple. I fight like big companies over business struggles, or anime heroes doing their friends in trouble. It ain't gotta be noble, I fight for stupid reasons. I find a reason to fight against any human breathing. If I'm on your block, you need to call a doctor. I'm hella big and I'm about to punch a helicopter. I'm super woke, so my eyes open. No provoking, I'm side scrolling. Street sweeper, peacekeeper, 2 cellulars, 3 beepers. You dignified with a simple mind, and that cash got you all hypnotized. Laptop and on InDesign so they don't watch what they gentrify. Yeah, Beatdown City, we gon' whoop your ass. Beatdown City, we gon' whoop your ass. Beatdown City, we gon' whoop your ass. Beatdown City, we gon' whoop your ass.
So yeah, over the time, I've been kind of just chasing this idea, like what does meaningful combat mean? I also actually worked on a board game that kind of starts turning into stuff like this, where people start fighting, and it deals with kind of the battle between corporations, independent graffiti artists, the city, and nonprofits who are anti-corporate vandalism. And we actually managed to make a sticker turf warfare game where people pushed and shoved each other. She ended up with a sticker on her. People ended up with marker all over their faces. It was pretty great time. So yeah, what does meaningful combat mean? And I realize that this is a dubious term. This is kind of me unpacking a lot of stuff that I've been thinking about a lot for kind of a long time. And this is just basically here to try to expand on that. So I think something that's interesting in games is people ask you like, what did you play as a kid? And I don't think that that's a really helpful metric for what you want to work on in the future. I mean, it's interesting because I did grow up with like these games, right? And these games really resonated with me. They were owned by friends. I didn't own like a Nintendo until I was like 14. But I didn't think about the combat. I didn't think about what was good about it. bad dudes in Double Dragon were basically New York, and that's where I'm from. So it felt like my home, like post-apocalyptic 80s New York is a real place. And Ninja Turtles was just all over the place. I loved all the games like that. Ninja Turtles is in New York also, but also like when I like in the 90s, I got really into Japanese RPGs. So it was like, you know, I went in a completely different direction. And in the 2000s, when I was in school, I was hashing out my own idea for a character action game, which is absurd, right? Because how are you going to make a 3D game like that? And especially when I was like really poor and was like, when I get lots of money, I'm going to make this cool 3D action game. But I started a research phase where, much to chagrin of my credit card, I started buying like all the character action games and never finishing any of them. And I was also really into wrestling, like really into indie wrestling as on the smart side. Like wrestling, I think is very important. It has a lot of language and a lot of ideas. That's me kind of right behind that dude who's holding his face with a pink Ballad of Gay Tony shirt on. Like these just ended up on their website, like Ring of Honor. It was an awesome show. But wrestling, like watching a lot of wrestling, you start to get a lot of vocabulary of combat because it's all, you know, super staged but it's there to get a live audience engaged. Like it's you are separate from it and you are not controlling it, but they want you to be cheering or angry or whatever. And then, so, you know, the 2000s had a lot of interesting games combat wise. In early 2008, while I was still like, you know, working on GTA 4, this game came along, and it's made by Creative Assembly and published by Sega. And this is one of my favorite beat 'em ups of all, like, I don't know, character action games or whatever of all time. It's such a smooth playing game. And I noticed press really didn't care about it, except like Play Magazine gave it like an A. And I know like the writer who wrote that's kind of dubious sometimes about what he's like thinks is like he's really excited about, but I decided to give it a plunge because I used to work at EB and my friends still worked at EB, so if I didn't like it, I could just bring it back. And I fell in love with the game. And this stars this Viking warrior, and terrible, like it's just very basic story, but like the interesting thing is he has this small axe and a sword. Like he doesn't have like a shield or anything. He just has two very close weapons. And it had all this like progression system. It had like these giant battles that you see here, like kind of Dynasty Warrior style, where there's hundreds of people running around. Like this is actually like a real screenshot. But you're a hero, so you have to fight their hero. And that's like part of the game where you're kind of in this weird open world fighting all these enemies that keep changing and they keep progressing, getting more difficult. Like you get regular guys and then you're fighting people with shields, and then there's two different ways to make combos that one will break the shield but is a longer combo, and one will pierce the shield and it might be a shorter combo. So they make it so that you keep learning how to play the game the whole way through the game, but you never get any more than these two weapons, and they're perfectly capable. And this game made me rethink because like I was like a huge fan of God of War when it came out. I was working at EB Games. We had it running in a machine, had the demo and everything. Loved that game so much. And then this game made me like really start to like, it really kind of opened up like the things I didn't like about the game, like how it has such a pulled back camera. It's very impersonal. The weapons are just so far away from like this guy is like up front and fighting people. And also like I took a class on, it was called The History and Technology of War, and it talked about how in Greece, like distance weapons were considered cowardly often, like how in the Iliad, Troy or Paris kills Achilles with an arrow, and that's to show that he was a coward because he wouldn't fight him with a sword, right? So like Kratos fighting kind of mid-range is kind of antithetical to like the Spartan spirit, right? Like so just from like a weird historical standpoint. But then there was also like a few years later, working really hard on, I forgot what it was. I think we were working to launch Red Dead Redemption, and I was playing God of War 3. But like a few years later after that, Feminist Frequency put up a video that really highlighted this element of this game where you take this woman and you put her in a cog to hold up a door, and then the cog crushes her, like turning her just into bloody bits, and you get an achievement that says, I didn't do it, but I wish I did. And they removed that from the remaster because then they also had like a bros before hose like achievement. Like, so there's like this like interesting, like the hyper masculinity of these games was like, I was completely unaware. And so then, you know, I'm working on this game and I'm starting to think about these things, and I start thinking about like, do I really just want to make it? Like I've been thinking about for the last few years, like, did I really want to make another violent game, like a game where you're fighting everybody? Because this game is really about, like, I grew up in New York. A lot of it actually deals with my own anxiety with people in New York. Like, you know, people say something or they want to touch your hair, or a cop like stops you for no reason and you want to fight them, right? Like, but you can't. So what if there was a video game where you could? And in 2014, I actually got a really good opportunity. I got to go to a Control conference in the Netherlands. Rami from Vlambeer invited me out there, put me up, and I made a talk. I don't know if it's anywhere, but it was called Building Better Beat 'em Ups, where I started to just do some research, and I was digging into the like evolution of genre, really like looking into, because beat 'em ups have a very strange progressive underbelly that it's not always super evident, and it's actually probably accidental half the time. But the beat 'em up genre is really ties all back to this gentleman, because, and like there were different manifestations of like the love for Bruce Lee. There's this game, Kung Fu Master Spartan X, which has Jackie Chan on it, but it was really based on Game of Death. And this is basically considered, like, it's designed by the dude who made like Street Fighter, and Bruce Lee. But it's also like really obnoxious game that really doesn't focus on anything. It's more about like conflict avoidance than anything else. And then you get like the first like game that really wants to be like a Bruce Lee movie, which is like, this is the game, the Japanese version of Renegade, which is, you know. So you see like the whole element of like, it's all about having like a real fight. There's many enemies around you, and it just feels like completely different. And the fact that these games came out super close to each other, it's very interesting. And so this man, Yoshihisa Kishimoto, he is from a playtest of Renegade in Chicago, and I always love this picture because like two black kids playing the game, and I always, you know, talk about black people being integral to games, and it's like, well, we have photographic proof that like the beat 'em up was born with these kids playing right behind him. And so he actually talked a lot about how he didn't like karate, he didn't like Kung Fu Master because it was just like a shoot 'em up. It was a shoot 'em up with fists. And there were other games that were out there that he was just like, these are clean fighting games, and I want to make a dirty fighting game. And the whole thing is he in high school, he liked to fight, watch Bruce Lee movies, and play video games. And he was like, I guess I'll go try to make video games. And he got to lead a whole team. And, you know, that game gave birth, his next game after that is Double Dragon, right? So that's like really important. So we can all see the Bruce Lee influence. And so there's other like, so when we talk about like less like kind of dichotomy of like meaningful versus not meaningful combat, like on the right, it's Samus just running through Super Metroid shooting like birds essentially, right? Like they're like the animals in the world. They don't matter. They're not like, they might hurt you, but they're not like fighting with you. You're actually disturbing their land. But the space pirates are the only things you actually ever have to actually kill in the whole game, because they are your actual adversaries. Similar with like Zelda, right? It's interesting because a lot of times we have games where you're fighting just animals. that are just wandering around, and it's like they're minding their own business and you're trying to mine them for like resources. So on the left you have Octoroks, which are just creatures that ignore you, and on the right you have the Lionels, which will destroy you, and they're basically they're actually there as a gatekeeping mechanism. So then we also have so a lot of this came from the fact that like a lot of times game combat is just a means to an end. They think that like you're just supposed to do it while you're going somewhere. And when asked about Tomb Raider's violent combat being dissonant with Lara Croft's journey in the first Tomb Raider, she said Rihanna Pratchett said, it's very difficult to keep that good, affable character when they're having to slaughter loads of people. And in the same article, she continues, certainly with the first kill having a lot of impact, Lara went quite a long time without having a weapon. Then there was the bow, and then quite a long time without a gun. There's lots of kills after that, but you can't play the same card over and over again. Every kill cannot be like the first kill. And I remember that E3, they kept talking about like protecting Lara and this and that, and then the trailer showed her like lighting people on fire. And I was just like, well, why does she have to kill anybody? Why isn't the first kill the one boss of the game, like the last boss? Like I kept thinking about like it's Tomb Raider. Why aren't you solving puzzles and people are maybe on the island and dying when you solve a puzzle, like because you trip something and you don't do it yourself? Why is she like lighting people on fire when she's supposed to be this like normal person, right? I always thought about like in the game, there's actually, you're climbing a ladder and one of your friends says, she says, I had to kill someone, and they say, wow, that must have been difficult. And I just started laughing and said, it wasn't difficult at all. Like the game just gives you all the tools to slaughter hundreds of people at a time. And it's just like, it's like but the fact that I feel like Rihanna Pratchett, because she's the writer, tried to dance around this. And I'm like, I feel like that's kind of like, well, you can design around that. That's kind of the point. So while trying to analyze this, I've been thinking a lot about these kind of set of steps. This is not like this is not prescriptive. It's just, these are things that I think about when analyzing games in general. And like, just because of the things like the movies and like wrestling and video games and all these things and like real sports that you like, these are things that I think about. Instigating incident instead of an inciting incident, building the fight, psychology, selling the drama. So instigating incident. Well, what started the fight? Like this, because an inciting incident is usually about an entire story. The instigating incident is what started this fight. Why are you fighting on a bigger story level? And why are you fighting different foes? What's your purpose? What is the purpose of fighting? And why are you fighting this particular enemy? Like what issue do you have with them? Building the fight is, every game has a beginning and an end, and every encounter in the game has design to it. They all have their own beginning and end. So how is the game progressing in terms of its fighting? But then how does each fight progress? How does each fight go from point A to point B? And then how do multiple fights kind of come into a row, and how do they create an arc design-wise? Psychology is, so I'm actually kind of reading a ton of stuff, because psychology is a term that I'm pulling from wrestling, actually, like in-ring psychology. There's terms like in-ring psychology, storytelling. Psychology is like, it's kind of, this is psychology, like psychology and storytelling kind of one. A lot of people kind of put them together, and it's kind of like, what is the story that the fight is telling? Is it actual playing mind games? Like, is someone really like messing with the other person? Is the hero hurt somehow and has to overcome the enemy? Or is the enemy hurt somehow and have to hide a very obvious weakness that you need to lure them into revealing? And then, selling the drama is basically the whole thing, but it's also, how do the player and the enemies sell the damage they're taking? How does your animation setup support fighting? How does the story sell the fights? How does the hero win cleanly all the time, or do you need to use outside interference to win? So instigating incident. So some some examples of this in Bad Dudes. You play as two cool guys who have to go rescue President Ronald Reagan, which I never really understood as a kid and don't understand as an adult either. Like they tell you, are you like you get the whole "are you bad enough to rescue the president?" But like, why would anyone care about rescuing Ronald Reagan? Like, unless you're getting tax breaks from him, or like it's not black people aren't rescuing Ronald Reagan. Double Dragon, you know, bikers kidnapped your girlfriend in a very plain and clear scene, and that the flawed motivators, right? Like damseling is often cheap motivation, but Double Dragon and a lot of other games at the time, like Final Fight, which came later, they are actually reflecting on pop culture references from like movies like Streets of Fire, which have Willem Dafoe playing a biker in like a very 50s setting, and he comes and kidnaps a guy named Cody's girlfriend, and you have to go rescue them. There were just a ton of American movies that were like that, which just kind of shows. So like on the first game, Kunio-kun, like he's out there rescuing his friend. He's actually saving his friend's reputation. And in the American version, when they put out Renegade, they changed all the students into bikers, and they changed saving like your friend got beaten up, so you gotta like beat up everybody in town, is now they kidnap your girlfriend. So it's interesting, like seeing how they switch, like why you're gonna go do something from country to country, and what's stuck, right? The bikers with the girlfriend is what's obviously stuck. So that's not. So yeah, there's that. I'm gonna have to go back to that slide. I don't want to show this because, but it's like a very clean scene. I actually really thought about how, like, in comparison, God of War, like the first God of War is strange because, you know, like I gotta go rescue my girlfriend. These people are bad. The game's like, okay, cool. But the first God of War is basically like, I'm bad. I'm a warrior, right? I'm killing barbarians, which just means foreigners, in like people who are not Greek. And when he's dying, he sells his soul to almost the devil, right? The devil's brother. And then in exchange for his life back in to win the war. And he wins the war. And then when Ares says, go kill your family, he's like, no, like, what are you doing? And he's like, you sold your soul to me. Like, it's the transaction. He was like, I don't accept that. And then he goes to kill him, right? Like, and it's just weird. Like, you're the bad guy, sort of. Like, you're the guy who couldn't uphold his end of the bargain. And so that's like interesting that like you just play this like rage infused anger-thon over just not being able, like, just let yourself die then. It's okay. Just go away. It's fine. You know, John Wick, a lot of people talk about how, like, it's funny because even still people mention the dog, right? But it's like, it's obviously more than that. It's another story with fridging, you know, the wife's dead. But it's the only object of John's like affection, right? Like he got out of his whole thing to be with her. She dies of like cancer, and then the dog is the symbol of his love for her. And it's just funny when you see people keep talking about the dog, and it's like the dog is so much more than that. And that's why it's like, oh yeah, he's gonna. And also they disrespect him, right? They treat him poorly, and he just like, nah, man, like you treat me badly, you take my car, I will murder everyone in your family for it. And it's just because it's just kind of a representation of who he is, because they always talk about how he's a person of focus. So it's like, why is he doing all this? It's kind of comical. Like I always said, when I walked out of John Wick the first time, I had never seen a trailer for it, and I walked out and I said, that is the best video game movie I've ever seen. And like it's funny because people talk about how Max Payne is like John Wick, but I'm like, Max Payne doesn't do Brazilian jiu-jitsu or judo or anything, right? Like Max Payne just dives at things. He has no melee power whatsoever. If anyone gets too close to him, he's just dead. And you know, you got other stories. You got like The Rock versus Stone Cold, which is more of like so this is more like, so we have like the macro, which were those stories before. This is how the stories are starting. This is why you're fighting. But these are like smaller, like instigating moments, micro instigating moments, like why is The Rock and Stone Cold fighting? And a lot of times they're just doing it because that's the story, right? Like, but they're so charismatic and they just talk so much trash about each other that you're just like, yeah, I want to fight. I want to see them fight. and they spend weeks and weeks and weeks like of having them do things to each other, and you're like, at the end, you're like, yeah, I want to see that match. I want to see that fight happen. They don't even have to fight in the lead up. There's a lot of like mind games, right? Psychology leading up to it before they even get in the ring with each other to actually wrestle. Like I remember The Rock throws Stone Cold's belt off a bridge. Yeah, amazing. Then you have like, new God of War, where you have Baldur. And in the first fight, it's Kratos protecting his son. You don't know who Baldur is. He's just a dude who showed up who's like weirdly super strong. I guess you just think he's like a vagrant. And then he's just like, oh, I can pick up a mountain. And I think Kratos and the player are both equally surprised. And there's like this hint that Kratos is like too old and maybe going to die or something. And so then you go through a lot of the game, and then like, your son gets involved, and like you're protective of that, but you've grown with your son. The fight's different. Like why you're fighting changes. It's a nice growth arc. And so you feel like you're like, yeah, I want to do this thing, right? This guy's been taunting me for a very long time. Time to take this dude down. And then you also have, the like social progressivism of like Bruce Lee, where in Fist of Fury, aka Chinese Connection, his whole school is being like bombarded by, it's like supposed to be a 1940 school where like a Japanese school comes in and says, we're better than you, like your race is inferior, and the sick man of Asia is like a racist stereotype thing. He takes this sign out and he just breaks it over his knee. And like the normally restrained audiences of like Chinese audiences like got up and clapped when they saw this, and it was just like, this was like they wanted to get up and start fighting people, right? Like it's a perfect moment. Then you also have like Last Dragon, which homage to Bruce Lee, where gentleman in the middle, Leroy, he doesn't want to fight, actually. And I think that's always a good thing. You don't want to fight, and there's this one guy who's a jerk who just keeps messing with you, and he's trying to figure things out. And but then pop culture at the time, his girl, or the woman of his affections, gets kidnapped by a music producer, which is a whole other level, because a black woman being kidnapped by like a white music producer to do music and dancing and feature his wife's, who's a white lady's like thing. So it has like a lot of social commentary, and he only really fights a few times in the whole movie, and when he does, it's for like real reasons. And then in Treachery in Beatdown City, you might have seen some of the like comments, but like you run into people, and every few fights or so, you're kind of introduced to people, and you have a reason why you want to fight them. Like somebody, like for Lisa, one of the first people, the person you fight in the tutorial asks her, he mistakes her for a cleaning woman, and then you get to beat the shit out of him because like my ex-wife, who actually helped design her, she's run into that in her real life, and people in the game ask to touch her hair, and they get belligerent about it, or people just won't say no to you selling CDs, or they want to stab you, or I don't know, they want to steal your money. And it's like, being in New York, it's like, I've had that experience where I was walking down the street, and like I walked one way and a homeless guy yelled at me asking for money, and I'm like, I'm just getting my mail, man, I'm broke. And I come back past him again, and then he's like, you think you're better than me? You're not. And I'm just like, man, just leave me alone. Like I got a lot going on in my life. Like I'm a broke indie dev, right? Like I think we're both at the same level. So then building the fight, this has been like very important to me. Like wrestling is really big in this, and Fire Pro Wrestling is huge in this. In that, like Fire Pro Wrestling, which is on everything, it's been out forever, but just recently on PC. Every wrestler uses this very seemingly simple but complex behavior tuning system that you can actually do when you edit the character, and you can look at their stuff. And people have done they've done data mines to find out all of the behaviors for these characters. And so you set percentages for behavior that vary as their health decreases. So there's stuff like how often do you circle the opponent? How often do you go in for square, circle, cross? Like, because those are different moves. How often do you run? How often do you basically press these buttons and then you try to tailor that to what type of character that you want? How often are you? How likely are you to assist in a tag match? Like, these are these little tiny percentages that create like a lot of spontaneity. But then there's also an auto counter and dodge rates that also change with health. And so that means that the game has no meters. And like in a lot of wrestling games, you have to build a meter, or a lot of fighting games or whatever. And when you build that meter, you eventually get to pull off your finisher, and that will probably end the match. And in this game, you can actually do your finisher immediately, but it has a very low chance it's going to hit at a high health thing. So if you actually do hit somebody with your finisher in the first moment of the match, you could end it very quickly. The game also has a thing called criticals, where if like a wrestler who's like a submissions guy or whatever is fighting someone and they're submissions person, so they can critical with submissions, that's a one-hit match ender, and you could end the match with one attack. And it's really exciting because usually you don't know when that's ever gonna come. And same thing in fighting games. There's this super meter that fills up as you attack, and or when you take damage. And filling up the super meter creates a moment of real tension. There's no guarantee that the super will hit, and if you whiff it or otherwise put yourself in a disadvantageous position, you can lose. You also have let me see. Well, Muhammad Ali, famous for building fights, in that there was one boxer who would not refer to him as Muhammad Ali, kept calling him Cassius Clay, and he basically took the whole fight to fight the guy just enough so he wouldn't lose, and kept saying, "What's my name?" So he basically just made a fight go to the end just to hurt somebody, because the person was actively, hurting him as a human being. And in,
the designer,
yeah, so
writer, artist.
let me can't see how to go forward at all. Yeah, so this is actually like just a demo thing where I was playing through. This thing doesn't do a good job of letting you fast forward. Okay. So in Treachery Beatdown City, I basically took the stuff from Fire Pro and from fighting games, in that we use the Fire Pro system to create behavior systems. It just basically have to put in these percentages, and basically wrote a whole like read tons of game facts on Fire Pro just to basically build that system. And so we have like classes like brawlers, sneaky supports. This is a sneaky character who's very likely to miss with your strikes, but you're more likely to be able to grapple him. That's how we balance that. But then all enemies, based on their health, have certain grapple counter percentages. So I missed the first hit, and then so he's kind of weak, and you just try to. And it's one character. We go up to about 3 characters at a time. You grapple him, put that on him, and then now he's taking damage, but he put me in blind. So like it's this whole like trying to use these class systems and these different percentages just to make the game like exciting. Like you also kind of start with low FP and you build to higher FP, but like with him, if you were playing with a character with stronger grapples, because she's our middle character, if you play as Brad, the big guy, he has like this body slam that can take out half of his health with one hit. So you could potentially beat him with 2 attacks, but then if you're fighting 3 people, then that's when you need to start actually thinking about it a little differently. And we also implemented this revenge meter, which is around the player's head, but which, as you get hurt, you fill it. We used to have like a super meter where it was like you build it by attacking, but that was very imbalanced, and people could kind of game that system. So we wanted to actually make it something that if you're having a hard time with the game, you can fight back. And also another like building a fight. Like this fight's always very funny to me because I don't know why you play like kind of hopscotch with this dude. Like, I don't know, this whole thing bothers me. This is something about something very different. Yeah, he starts like, yeah, he starts basically trying to play jump rope. So psychology. Let's go back to that other slide, the Evo moment 37. So even Evo moment 37, I'll just let you all watch this for a second.
Rare footage of Daigo actually angry. Justin's turtle style. Overcome Rao. Now on the verge of putting Daigo down 1-0.
So there's a lot of reasons why that's very exciting, right? Justin Wong is Chun-Li, Daigo is Ken. It's a little hard to see because it was a long time ago, and the lower left-hand corner was covering Chun-Li's super meter, but Justin has a full super meter and a life lead, and Daigo was being very aggressive and thought it would either pay off or he'd lose otherwise, so he just goes for it. But Justin starts building up his meter, but when he starts trying to bait Daigo, you see a point where Daigo's just moving back and forth. He actually stops trying to actively attack Justin, and Justin takes that as a time to do this very unsafe move that Daigo baited him into, which is psychology, right? Like like a huge thing about fighting games specifically is you're actually trying to get people to do the thing that you want them to do. So that's where like terms like footsies come from. You're like trying to poke them or just move in a way that they think that they have the upper hand on you, and then you take advantage of it. And if Daigo would have tried to attack or tried to block that, he would have lost. But while he's actually doing the parries, he builds super meter during the whole thing, so then he's able to win the match basically. So then there's like a fight construction. Like I just really think that like this is after the whole him bringing out the sign and breaking it and just being like, you know what, I've had enough of what everyone's doing here. And like this whole movie is psychological games with Bruce Lee, right? They're taunting him, they're calling him racial epithets, and he's trying to just get through. And even here, you can tell people are like, it's like a beat 'em up because everybody's like, I don't know if I want to go for this dude. And I mean, like games like Batman, everything, they basically owe everything to Bruce Lee's choreography. And if you ever, it's funny, I actually was watching something where they were talking about beat 'em ups or, it was Jason McDonald. He's the lead of the Sony Santa Monica's game design. And he was talking about, someone asked, like, how do you control this? And, you know, if you're trying to build a combat system, you want to try to do a list system where enemies, they come at you based on, like, where, like, they're, like, oh, are they closest to you? Then they're more likely to attack. And the people who are furthest away from you are in, like, a list where they might try to move up. And then when they take that spot, then they can fight you. And if you watch that, and then you watch, so this is, wait, what? So then Renegade, this is a good screen. As we saw, like the Japanese version before, he's fighting everybody around him. But this game added in like grapples, it added in like just the people surrounding you. Double Dragon has that all built into it, and we really worked to build that into it. And so there's also just like these amazing moments in John Wick 3. And you've got these very brutal, like psychological and selling like elements, like in wrestling, like The Rock, like he hits him hardcore, and Mick Foley like takes that straight to the head for story reasons because he thinks it'll work better. His kids are in the audience, and they had to kind of watch this. And if you think about just selling, selling is a big thing from wrestling. No selling, like, I don't want to really mention his name, but Hulk Hogan's famous for his whole no sell thing. But then you get like The Rock, who like sells like a champ. Like that just makes you like, you see that move and you're just like, whoa, that was the coolest thing on the planet. And then also he's a good guy because he's like really trying to make Stone Cold go over, versus this guy, like who can't even take a stunner, right? Yeah, Donald Trump got stunned on TV, and if you notice, he falls before the stunner because can't do anything right. And then you got God of War. Like this is amazing. Like actually, there's this talk that hopefully will end up on GDC's YouTube page in another month or so. But yeah, Jason McDowell talked about like I learned so much about this game. Like when you play the game, you can't appreciate it, but these characters have all these different like kill states. And like I have my own issues with the game, but like the way everything sells is really great. The fact that you can just punch someone into a wall and blow them up, but only if you know like the right path of weapon usage. And then like just kind of, oh no, can't really. I should have trimmed that clip. So conclusions. So yeah, this is kind of for me. This is still very much in progress. I think one of the things that, like, I think one of the reasons why I really started wanting to make my own combat is because I used to see my friend doing, like, playing Diablo 2 maybe, in their dorm room, and they're just like clicking on nonsense and things are dying, but like nothing's animating. Things are just running at you and just dying. And I know it's like fun, but for me, I was just like, this just. And again, like I've done the whole RPG grind. Like I know what it's like to just do it, and it's, I don't know, it's not meaningful, right? It's like you're doing this means to an end thing, right? Like you're trying to get loot to go buy a thing, to get more loot to go buy a thing. I don't know. They kind of locked you into that, and like I like Diablo more like on the Switch, right? Like because when you press a button, a thing happens, and it just makes you feel like you're more in control. I think that hurt animations on enemies are really important. Going through Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 right now, and Diablo on Switch, just because I was like looking at them, and like Beat River City Girls, and when like it's really frustrating, or like God of War, when you fight like these really big enemies that just don't flinch at anything you do, and you're just like, am I doing anything here? Like, am I, like when you saw Hades, right? Like you're just hitting him and he's just walking around, and you're just like, but this isn't like a fight, right? Like if like Muhammad Ali was fighting Mike Tyson and Mike Tyson was just standing still and just punching him while he was punching back, you'd be like I don't want to see this. Like the whole point is you want to see a story. Like there's no story going on if you're just hitting a thing and you're lowering some invisible meter that's gonna get them into like a stun mode. I think Marvel Ultimate Alliance does better because they show the stun meter, and it makes you feel a little bit like, well, if I get that stun meter down, like then Kingpin will fall down, and then I get to do a lot of attacks to him. And that game does a good job of storytelling because like enemies start running around and picking up stuff in the environment and throwing it at you instead of just existing in a box. But that game fails in the sense that a lot of Marvel games fail, that they just throw enemies at you and you don't actually know why you're doing anything. Like one of the first levels in that game, you go to the raft, and like if you weren't watching all the movies, you wouldn't know what the raft is. And I know all the enemies, right? Like I grew up with Marvel, but if you did not, like who gives a shit who Bullseye is, right? Like he doesn't even look like the Bullseye in the Netflix special, right? Like, so how would you know any of that? And so it's like I find myself running through the game And as a Marvel fan, not actually like I'm like, oh, that's novel. It's Kingpin. Oh, it's Bullseye. It's this person. It's the Hand. Yeah, cool. I've seen them in cards for most of my life. It doesn't feel super mean. Like I kind of put it down because I was just like, there wasn't anything propelling me forward. And I mean, like I already seen the movie with like Thanos, right? Like I don't know. Like I would rather sit through 5 hours of watching those movies than maybe playing that game, because I could just sit there and just veg out when I'm not interested, because I'm often not interested in those Marvel movies. But like when some things happen, you're like, oh man, feel really good. Like when everybody shows up at the end of the second Infinity War or whatever, then you're like, you feel something, even if it's like very fleeting, and then you're like, wait a minute, this is just cheap movie bullshit. But like movies have a really good job of making you care. Like I watched The Green Book, and it's a bad movie, but it's also a really well-made movie that makes you feel the thing right before you're angry, right? Like if you know the like context, you're like, so games often just don't have that, but they've been working towards it. So I just want people to, I don't know, just think heavily about what they're doing when they're designing combat, and also, yeah, just like stop making, there's a lot of games that you just hit things and they don't react, and that actually affects the gameplay, because if a thing doesn't have a hurt state, then that means it just keeps running at you. And like if 10 enemies run at you and just they can kill you, because if they just touch you, I don't know, there's little things like that we can all learn from like just playing like old beat 'em up games or whatever to make newer games, and there are things that just kind of get missed often. And this is something I'm still like, expanding on and thinking about. But yeah, thank you. So yeah, if anybody has any questions. Yeah.
Do you know about Kingdom Hearts 2's revenge value system for the bosses? And if so, how do you feel about the implementation?
Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories on the Game Boy Advance like made me really upset, so I stopped playing the games at that. Like I played Kingdom Hearts 1, beat it, and I was like, I like this, and I got Chain of Memories, and that game had a lot of weird, like, it was nonsense. It was just like hitting stuff for very low HP values. Nobody reacts. And I was just like, and it was also when I was in school. So like I would just bounce off of things pretty quickly, because when you're working 60 hours a week and going to school the other 40 or something, or 20 some odd, then it's like, I don't know. But yeah, I actually got Kingdom Hearts 2 for free when I worked at EB Games, and I never played it because because I heard about the beginning of the game. Like that's the other thing, like the beginning of a game, like if you want people to care about the thing, you might need to front load that and not hide it behind another person. You might need to be able to get to the combat before people lose interest. Anything else? Anything? Yeah.
How do you pick out breather moments for people fighting?
Huh?
Pick out breather moments.
Oh, okay. So for me, that's why there's that little like overworld, so that every time a fight's over, there's nobody coming, right? You can go, we have like boxes and stuff you could break open afterwards, and then when you leave that, you go back to the map, and you don't have to fight. Like you'll know who the next person you need to fight is, and I also put, like that map was specifically built as, that was like that's been my demo map. It runs you through things quickly, but that's why we also put like the bicyclist in there, so that it was somebody that you don't really have to think too much about, and that's kind of annoying you anyway, because why are they riding the bike on the sidewalk? And then so try to like put like little twists and turns, just give people little bits of breather. Double Dragon 1 was really good in that on the Nintendo, because of the limited, that game's strangely cinematic because it has lower memory, so you can only fight a couple of people at a time, and then they like give you these nice breathing areas. And I think definitely, although breathing room, I don't know, a lot of people make like environments, like I'm thinking about Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, where you see these environments that are not interactive at all, but they try to do all this like cinema language in them, and it becomes very uninteresting, because you're like, oh, can I jump over there? And you're like, no. And you're like, I'm Ms. Marvel, I can fly everywhere. Can I fly up? No. So, and it's supposed to be a beat 'em up, and you're like, okay, but I don't know. me personally, I think like the MacGuffin of like the weird piece of polygonal geometry that looks like you should be able to go to, but you can't, is really annoying. And like, yeah, I mean, you just have to really engineer that. Just no enemies, then enemies. And also, so for me particularly, I do a ton of spreadsheet editing. Like I try to understand the difficulty of everybody in the game, and then when they come together, add that together, and then I go into the columns and I make difficulty numbers so that you go like to a 2, then a 4, then a save point, then nothing, right? Like I always have one node in between enemies also so that you don't accidentally walk into somebody else. Those are all just little things. I mean, that's how like Mario Brothers 3 did it too, right? Like you have a level, then you walk to an empty node, then you maybe walk to another one, you talk to somebody or something. So that's all another thing. We also put like discussions. That's why like when you run into certain enemies, we actually try to space it out, like because we have a lot. You're learning all the enemies when you start the game, but not every enemy has a discussion before them, because that would be a little tiring to be like, well, how many people do I have to get through listening to them talk about something before I get to fight? So the first person you fight, you talk to them. The second person, you don't talk to them. The third person, you don't talk to. Then like the fourth person, you do. And that's the fourth person will be the same as the first person, but with something slightly better. So like, you just kind of string it out over time and just make sure that you're just leaving space. Also putting like item things to distract people to go to get the thing. Any other question? Let me get him. I'll get you right. So.
Basically, what you're saying is that you want something of like the Arkham series experience where Batman is fighting all the prisoners and there's animation, there's actual like combat scenes where and there's actual positive issues like each group of prisoners that you fight. The problem with that is that I'm saying is that to make like a combat experience like that, most people will just say you just copy what the Arkham series did. So how can you create original combat without ripping off something like the Arkham series?
Okay, so yeah, I forgot about repeating the question. The question was, how do you make a combat system like another game without being accused of stealing from that game? I mean, people steal from everything all the time, but Arkham's not perfect. I like Arkham Asylum a lot. I don't like City at all. I think City is like, it's an open world that's empty. It's basically doing like early 2000s. Like it has GTA 3 missions in it. Like it has literally like phones that you have to like. I was playing GTA 3 on mobile at the exact same time I was playing City, and I'm like, these are the same missions. Like you guys lifted something from like 10 years ago. I don't know. Arkham's weird. Arkham's very weird. I think Arkham's interesting if you really just look at the yeah, Batman jumping around. That has to all do with your like what you want your character to be like. I remember Game Maker's Toolkit kind of like didn't really like Arkham, and I didn't think he really understood the what was going on there, because like Batman Arkham like Asylum, like they have the exact same things as every other game. They have tiered enemies, right? They have the enemies that you just knock around. Then they have like people with like stun guns. Then they have people with batons that are immune to other things. I mean, Shadow of Mordor, those games, those are all just ripped straight from like Batman. But people didn't say those are ripped straight from Batman, because they had their own innovations with the Nemesis system, right? Like, I mean, all these games are just pulling from a lot of the same stuff. Like, there's only so much that you can do, and but yeah, like Batman, I mean, it has a list system. All of the games have a list system, right? Like they're all like, that was literally actually when we were building the game initially, we just had the enemies bum rushing. You were like, what's going on? And one of my friends was just like, yeah, list system, like everything does it. And like Assassin's Creed, they they're gonna feel the way that you want them to feel. That's the other thing, like for the like selling, right? Like I don't know, Batman's weird because they really focus, like if you stand around, nobody does anything. Like I've watched videos where they just like stand and like 5 people are surrounding because they're really waiting. I mean, it's all up to you. Like Dark Souls, right? Like you don't necessarily need to, like Dark Souls enemies will attack when they're near you, whereas Batman, they won't. So then that comes down to like your own tuning, right? You want to, like, what experience do you want them to have? Do you want them to have the Batman Arkham Asylum experience? Then, Yeah, like I mean, I remember they made that Captain America game that was a lot like they all talked about it in reviews. They were like, yeah, it's like Batman Arkham Asylum, but with Captain America, so we like it, right? Like so, I don't know, like Fatal Fury was made when Street Fighter 2 was made by this guy who made Street Fighter, and they were very similar games, and they're both still around. So I mean, you know, it all depends on what you want, and if you dress it up enough, like if you like one of the key important things to focus on are your own details, right? Like your own aesthetics. You know, Arkham Asylum, that series is not perfect. So you know, you have your own little predilections, the things that only you have, and then you really have to focus on that. Like too many people focus on like genre as like a defining thing, and I think you need to focus on what makes you special and why you're making the thing. Like, because I've been working on a lot of things and like trying to chase that all-encompassing like genre thing actually is what led me. So I don't know, like my game has like real-time and turn-based elements in it, and that was a direct reaction to a lot of what was going on. I actually left out about like how Castle Crashers made me upset because it was basically Ninja Turtles 2 but less interesting, because it wasn't the Ninja Turtles, and like I like the Ninja Turtles, but like 20 years later, don't want to play these like knights that are fighting like a shitting deer. Like I don't know. So with like the same progression, so it was kind of like, well, then I started going in like I like RPGs, so how can we fuse the two? And you know, so you'll find your own way. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for coming. But yeah, you know, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter.